It is our honor and privilege to run this event with the support of the India Oracle Apex user group also. Please remember to register to as many sessions as you can. This way we'll be also able to access to our replays in the system until April 20. I would like to say thanks to all Oracle user groups and Java user groups that made this event possible, and also to our sponsors, the Oracle Ace community, the DevRel team, and your main sponsors, Oracle Corporation and CloudDB. Now for today's session, Grid Greatness, Editable Grid Essentials by Karen Cannell. Please feel free to write questions at any time during the session at the chat tab of the live webinar, and the speaker, in this case, Karen, will be answering them at the end of the session. If there are any issues during the presentation, please feel free to contact me at any time by using the chat tab of live webinar. Now, without any more delays, I would like to leave you with this amazing session by Karen Cannell. Karen, the room is yours.
Thank you, Francisco, and welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here. I always love doing things for APAC, and anytime Francisco asks, I'd love to help out. So welcome. We're going to talk a lot about grids. Support your user groups. It is the best way to learn and meet people and grow your career. Also support your sponsors. Many thanks to the DevRel, to the ACE community, Oracle, and CloudDB. Many thanks for making these things possible. TH Technology is my company. It's evolved by being involved with my user group, and I learned things and did things and volunteered, and then I got to be on the board, and I'm involved in OD-Tug. I'm an Oracle ACE director. I've done a bunch of stuff, and I learned mainly by coming to events like this and giving back where I can. This is my happy place. I'll be there in May. Why do you care? There's a little dot there. That's me swimming around. I go there and I swim for 2 hours at a time, and nothing eats me. And why do we care? Because the way the world has been, everybody needs their happy place. So whatever you need to do to stay sane, stay safe, stay vigilant, vaccinate if that's how you feel, because we want to get everyone out to live conferences again. There's a great one coming up in June in the US, KScope 22. We will be live. There's others. There's Ascend. There's Blueprint 4D in Las Vegas. Hopefully we can see you guys come this fall. We want to get back to normal meeting people in person. And I put up this slide because I always like to ask you in person, what's your Apex experience? What versions are you on? Do you have a grid strategy? And are there any JavaScript experts in the field like Dan McGinn? Because I'd like to tailor the presentation to you. But in the absence of that, I'm just going to aim for the middle. And some reminder slides. Apex is a wonderful tool. They gives us lots of tools in the sandbox, and they keep giving us more. They gave us interactive grids. They kind of gave us this thing to build the Taj Mahal. But we don't have to use the tools Apex gives us. We can put whatever we want on that HTML page. We can use all kinds of JavaScript. We can do our own code. We don't have to use the Apex wizards. But when you do that, you're out in the desert on your own. When it comes to any kind of upgrade, you are on your own. And you can see the little tracks there. Someone went right over the cliff. You don't want to end up that way. So know your tool and use your tool. Use the things that Apex gives us. It's a low-code development environment. And yeah, we do a lot of generating, but most of what we do is we generate and then we customize. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. How to make interactive grids do the things you want them to do. And so we're going to back up a little. Why do we have these interactive grid things at all? And that's because anyone, and this is where I'd love to know if there's anyone here that ever worked with tabular forms. Well, that was me, and I didn't like them, and most people I knew didn't like them because we had to write a lot of code to get them to do what we wanted. So we had a big laundry list of features that we wanted, and interactive reports came out, and we said, those are great, just make them editable. And so the Apex team did, and they came up with the interactive grids. But they are not the same as interactive reports. They are not editable interactive reports, totally different structure. And if you're a geek like me and like to know about the structure under the hood, then I recommend that you read hardlikesoftware.com. And that's John Snyder's of the Apex team. That's his blog. And way back in 2016, when grids came out, he wrote this interactive grid under the hood. And in 30 seconds, grid architecture is everything in blue that you see here is a JavaScript widget. And you said, Karen, wait a minute. I thought Apex was PL SQL generating HTML pages. Well, long ago, it used to be. Now they're integrating more and more JavaScript widgets. And if you're a PL SQL developer and JavaScript is somewhat of a four-letter word, don't worry, we're all coming along. Everything that I'm going to show you here is easier than you anticipated, and there's no way out of it. You're going to have to learn this stuff. So come along with us. We can all do it. We're all going to survive. So lots of JavaScript widgets. Everything in yellow is a module. So apex.item. Interesting. Now the columns under here, every column in an interactive grid is an Apex item. That's really cool. That means we can do things like cascading list of values and dynamic actions on columns declaratively. Really cool. One other thing I want to note is this apex.model. The model in JavaScript, in interactive grid speak, means data array or data collection, think of it. But in interactive grid speak, the model is just that view of the data. So notice we have a grid model, a group by model, different view of the data, detail model, icon model. You can have an icon view or a chart model. Don't worry about all those other ones for editing, because when you're editing, you're working with the grid model. So we've got JavaScript widgets, we've got collection of items, we've got our data in models. Okay, that's all you need to know. Not really, a little bit more history. Because of how interactive grids are built, your data edits are going back and forth to the server via JSON. And remember that we're a collection of widgets now, not one big JavaScript module. And again, different from interactive reports and tabular forms, if you remember them, we are no longer working with collections, we're working with that JavaScript model. Each column is an item, and just in terms of how things look, we now have a fixed table layout, which means your grid is going to expand to fit the width of your region on the page. Maybe that's the width of the page. And it's going to try and adjust the columns to fit that. So it may stretch some, it may and do things other. And there are ways to adjust that which are outside of this editable focus. So we're just going to look at the essentials. So, excuse me. I'm going to do some slides for a bit, and then I'm just going to jump in and show you things, and then I'll come back to the slides where we can. So right off the bat, excuse me, we have a row selector. We don't have to build this with an apex.checkbox, apex.item.checkbox. It's just there. We can turn it off. We can have multi-select. A row action menu. Well, this is a new thing. And when you expand that, you've got a link to a single row view. That's handy. You can add a row right there. You can duplicate a row right there. Your delete row, notice, is in that row actions menu. Refresh or revert changes. More on this later. We've got an add button. By default, it says add row. I can declaratively customize it to say add employee or add thingy. This edit button, its purpose is it toggles edit mode on and off. By default, when I load my page, edit mode is off. I can either click on this edit button or I can double click in a field. Well, if you're like me, or any of my data entry users, double clicking on a field is easier than clicking a button and then going to the field. So you may leave it there. You may not want to have an edit button. That is up to you. We'll talk about more on that later. Obviously, a save button, it's set as the hot button. This save does not submit page. It just saves for this interactive grid. Really kind of a neat thing. Some editable settings. Edit, we look at the interactive grid, we look at the attributes. Edit by default is not enabled. Not every interactive grid is editable. They don't have to be. There's lots of other uses for interactive grids. We're just talking about the edit. And once I turn edit on, now I've got a whole new set of options like add row, update, delete row. I can declaratively say I never want anyone to add or delete from here, updates only. This allowed row operations is, we use that, and I'll show you more about this later. If you only want certain actions on a particular row, you can have a column in your query that is either U or UD that indicates what's allowed for that row. Lost update type, that means, and by default, this row values is checksum. That means it's going to look at the checksum of all columns. And so the checksum on the row to determine, is this really the latest row in, when it hits the server. It can either be row values or it can be a set column, i.e. date updated. When we load the grid, you want a row added by default if it's empty. These are simple settings. In terms of what is editable, you can have columns that are display only, or you can set the columns to query only. On rows, we use that allow row operations. I promised I would show you what I mean. This will have it make sense for you. So I'm creating in my query a column that I then use to declaratively tell the grid, is this row editable or not? And in this case, if the job is president, we're not editing it at all. If it's a manager, you can update it. Otherwise, you can update or delete. Now, your rules are going to be different, but that gives you the idea what that allowable row update is. When it comes to a column, and obviously this editable column is a perfect example. It's query only. No one can edit that. I don't want them to edit it. If I even allow them to see it, this is one that I would probably leave as hidden. Lost update tab. I talked about this a little like a minute ago. By default, it's that checksum of all queryable columns. Unless you have a specific reason, I have found that everything works great. And this is for if I'm editing the row at the same time someone else is editing the row, who's going to win kind of thing. That's what that's for. Locking a row, way beyond the scope of this. By default, the lock row is for update no wait. There are some nuances to this, and I gave you the reference to look up more details there. Who can edit? And I'm going to jump in now because this is a good one to show you. Where is my... That's this. Sorry for this. So I have this interactive grid app that I have a lot of stuff in here. So we're just going to jump into just the basics. I think this is my page. Who can edit? So this is my standard interactive grid. It's based on one of the demo dep columns when you install a sample application. If anyone wants this application, I can send you the whole ball of wax. Just contact me via Twitter at THTechnology or email kkcannell@THTechnology. And all this information is in your slides. So let's look at this standard grid. It's got the save button. I can edit. I've made, a radio group there. I think this one's a select list. I can make these changes and and do a save. That's a non-standard user. So very, very simple. But what we were just looking at here is who can edit. Now, I'm logged in right now as TH Tech. Let me just close this down. All these things that I was just showing you, and I went through rather fast. The region itself is pretty basic. You've got the source, the layout, the appearance. One addition for interactive grids is this master detail. We'll talk about that a little more. Everything else in the region part is pretty much like region stuff, right? So we're not going to talk so much about that, but here's my edit. Is it enabled or not? The allowed row operations. I don't have one in this. Add a row if empty. This edit authorization. Now, this they give you right out of the box. If I have roles, authorization roles in my application, I can declaratively say, allow this person to add and this person to delete. So I've said is admin. Now, the user I'm logged in as is an admin. So I am seeing the add row and I am seeing the delete in here. If I were to log out, and I'm trying to convince you to use these buttons, and hopefully this will do it, and log back in as another user, I no longer have the add row, and lo and behold, neither do I have the features that go with delete. So very, very simply, declaratively, I have turned on and off buttons and features. So use these options. They are there to make your life easier. And I think a lot of people skip over that particular setting. And it's just so easy that I really want to make sure people know how to use that one and take advantage of it. Some things generally when you build an editable grid, or say you turn a tabular form into an interactive grid, you need to set a primary key, and you need to set the page reload submit to only on success. Now, if you don't do that, it gives you a very ugly message that tells you exactly what you need to do. I need a primary key. So you go in, and how do I set a primary key? On one of my columns, I say primary key yes, and this is in my column attributes. This is in my page, reload on submit, and it tells me exactly what I need to do. By default, that reload on submit is always, unless I created the page specifically for an interactive grid, then these settings will be correct. This setting will be correct. You still have to set your primary key. Let's talk a little bit about the row selector. Really nice. If anyone ever used tabular forms, declaratively we get multi-select, show the select all on the top, or hide the whole thing. You don't have to have the row selector all the time. You will not want it all the time. And if you have it and you want to use it in PL SQL processing, this is the reference. Apex row selector is X means selected. This is a very simple example, but that's exactly how you would use it. Now, more likely, you're going to be using something in JavaScript, and it's the same thing. This documented JavaScript API gets selected records. So this view is a grid view. I have the selected records. I'm just looping through them, getting the value of the salary for that particular record. So this is a way you could, use that row selector via JavaScript. And this is just to give you an idea. Now the row action menu, as I showed you earlier, has that add, duplicate, delete. If you are allowed to do those actions, and just to point out here, when I was not allowed to add or duplicate when I was not allowed to add, I was also not allowed to duplicate, obviously, so that dropped out as well. The row action menu shows up as a column. You can actually choose to not show that at all. And then there are use cases for that. Saving interactive grid data. Now we have some interesting options, and let me just jump through. Well, for now, you can use the region source, tabular view, or Sql Code. And I'm not going to read all of this for you. Most of the time, we're going to use that region source. And that will use the SQL query that's there. And if I have columns in there, like say that editable, or maybe I have some display only stuff, I need to set those to query only. And that means they don't get sent to the server for processing. Another option is this table view. I'm not going to show you this, but maybe my query is on a view, but I want it to insert, update, and delete based on an alternate table, or maybe on the table that the view is based on. You can do that declaratively as well. This Sql code, maybe I have a Sql API or my own custom code. This allows me to use any Sql code, but of course I have to write it. It's not going to do it for me. So let's take a look at some of that. And I'm going to go into this one that says edit processing. And now by default here, this first one, and this just goes over it. I can use the region source, tabular view, Sql code, or I can write my total custom whatever I want to do. An easy way that I've seen done a lot is to write data to a collection and work from there. So this is your basic processing. I don't know. We can just, I don't know who, any old change, and it's going to save. And this is my standard processing. Now, I also had another thing happen where I logged my data to a collection. So interesting. What is that collection thing? And if I look at my session, and I'll show you the code in a moment, and I look at the collections, I have a collection with a row of 1, that Blake manager that I just touched, because I asked it to do it behind the scenes. So let's look behind the scenes and see what's going on. Don't move. I hate it when that happens. So undo that. Okay, we're back to where we want to be. So for editing, you don't have to stick with the default stuff. So this is my standard grid. I haven't changed anything here. By default, I have this save interactive grid, and by default, the target type is region source, and that's success, standard grid processing save. That's what we just saw. I think it'll still be here, standard grid processing save. Okay, now where'd this extra message come from? Well, I also have a process here that is my custom process that is saying, okay, and it executes for each row. Once per page visit. And there's my editable region. So once I give it an editable region, it's executing for every row that gets submitted. And all submitted rows is maybe not what you think it is. So this is a simple, all I'm doing is adding a member to a collection for every row that I touched. Now I can take that data and do whatever I want with it. There's lots of other ways you could do this. You could save it in a temporary table or whatever. I like using Apex collections. They're handy. They're right there. They're managed very well. This by itself is not complete code. I'm not checking to see if this member is already in this collection or not. This is just for demonstration purposes only, something that you could do. So that's an option. Now, what if I have this other table down here, and I'm going to close it. This is the standard stuff. So this is just this is on a standard emp table. And my query is a little different. On this one, I only queried 3 columns. I could have queried a lot more. But in this processing, now I got this same save interactive grid data that works on this region. And instead of saying region source, I said Sql Code. Well, then it opens up a space for me to add that code. And so this is what that kind of code looks like. I use that apex row status. If it equals C, then for create, then I do an insert. If it's update, then I do an update. Now this is very, very simple. Just to illustrate, this is the kind of code that you would need to build out if you want to use this PL SQL process target type. And it's really that simple. So just to prove that it works, I can, on this M table, I can go in and this is, let's get rid of this for first, just so we know that we're getting the same one. And I'm just going to do something really simple and say save, and it saves. And we know it's that grid save, that process that ran, because, and I always recommend you do this, give your users an idea that something happened, and you can put your own message in there. So that we have those edit processing options that are really, really cool, and make use of them. They're there. I know of people that don't trust these processes. I don't know what it does behind the scenes. So they use their own PL SQL APIs for everything. You can do that. And there are legitimate, very good business reasons to do that. All I'm pointing out here is you don't have to do that. So if you want to, you can add these PL SQL processes. You can add your own save button. The other thing I want to point out here is, say I want to use my own save button. I created one save button on the page, and I'm not even sure where this one save button is going to show up. It's somewhere on the page. It shows up somewhere. Who knows where it was? Well, it's kind of hidden at the moment. Oh, I know what I did. It's not hidden, it's deprecated. So I'm going to undeprecate it. And so now I have a button on the page, a save button. But I don't like where that button is. It's up here. What I can do with, what I want to do is move it into my grid. And the way I'm doing that is with some inline CSS. And let me just make this a little bit bigger so you can see, and that doesn't really help make it bigger. But all I'm saying is take this button with the save action and move it after this thing called save button. And I give it a little bit of a margin there. It was 4 before. What this does is going to move that save button into my grid. Now, once I've done that, I don't want the grid button anymore. And so what this save button is, now it's my button. I have control over what processes it fires, right? Because I can give it a name. I can give it authorizations. I can do all kinds of things to it. Now what I would do is come over here and see, I don't have anything locked down here. I'm going to say in this toolbar, I'm going to say don't show the save button, and run this. And now I've just replaced their save button with my save button. You may have a use case for this. I'm not saying to do your own save button instead of theirs. I'm saying it's a possibility if, for example, you had to use PL SQL APIs and couldn't fit them in the standard processing. Just an option for you. I'm hoping you're looking a little confused because this is a lot to absorb. But I have a lot of this in the slides as well. I can give you this, and I'm open to questions at any time. So edit processing, lots of possibilities there. And I didn't even touch all the stuff you can do with REST APIs as opposed to a SQL query source. But again, this PL SQL code option should be used when you're using web services as your source. And you can put your code in there. So lots of possibilities here, really cool stuff. More about the same. This is what I just showed you. Master detail. This used to be really difficult to build. Now it's not. You have a master region. You build your master region, you build your detail region. in the detail region, you say what is the master region. And oh, by the way, they give you the directions here. And I'm just going to show you that because it's so fun if you ever did this with tabular forms. I have a master, a detail in order to connect them. And these are just standard grids. I have not turned on or off buttons or anything. When I go into my detail, now this is one of the few things that is not in the attributes part of the grid. It's in the actual grid part itself. And it says master detail. It's going to look at the other regions on the page. I only have one. So I've said master region, right? I should be done, but nope, I'm not done yet. I have to then say, which column am I joining by? And in this case, it's DepNo. And it asks master column. It knows which columns are in my master region, and I'm going to choose DepNo. And now these two are linked. And if I'm editing, now I have two editable grids in master detail, and poor operations doesn't have anybody in it. They're all working from home or didn't come back after COVID, I guess. I just saved myself writing a lot of code, a lot of business rules, a lot of joins, and a lot of processing. Now you still want to lock all this down. Maybe I want to have one button up here and not have my save buttons, which I've done on these already by just simply unselecting them because I have a master save, and for processing, the same stuff is there and will fire on my save button, or not, depending on what your business rules are. After master detail, I just want to point out cascading list of values are very, very simple. Now, this is a very silly example because I have the department and wrong one because we know there's no one there, and employees. But the way you do that is what is important. And so one column is a list of values. And the second column, which is my cascading, these are just like on an item. So there's my query and there's my parent column. It's really that simple. So we don't want to spend too much more time on that. Validations. Whenever you have an editable form, you need to, I believe, have a data model that has some validations in it. And when you build your interface, building client-side validations, either the HTML5 ones that are now declaratively, well, semi-declaratively in your Apex grids and forms. So know what those are. I have a whole separate presentation just on validation. So we're just going to touch the tip of the iceberg here. So you want your client side, use those HTML5 ones where they make sense. I'll show you in a moment. And have another setting on server. So I'm just going to run through them here. We did the cascading list of values. Oh, by the way, if you did tabular forms to do a cascading list of values, that's the kind of code you used to write. That's what we write now. So we're happy. Dynamic actions are just like dynamic actions on a regular item. We need them in our validations. So the column name references all work. Dynamic actions on the column are great. This HTML5 thing, what was that? Well, as of, I believe it's 5.1, we can use HTML5, i.e. outside of Apex. I can give it a pattern, and then this construct called a data valid message, which means this is the message I want you to use when there's an error. And in doing that on this page, using that same pattern, so if I did Blake for whatever reason, maybe it's a typo, it's going to tell me right away that that is not okay. And the way it's doing that is that HTML5 reference on the column. So there's one option of doing it, and I'm going to show you a few others. So where does that go? It goes all the way down in the custom attributes. And this is exactly where you would put them. Now, there's lots of options there. reference my validations presentation. I can forward that to you as well. Now, if I didn't have something like this, I could have done that by a simple dynamic action. It's deprecated here just because I'm not using it. But I could do essentially the same thing in a dynamic action, execute JavaScript code. Now, this is outside of the scope of this, other than to say you need the client-side validation and the server-side. This is a construct where we use the apex.item to get the column, the same apex.item to get value, and then I want the length of it because I want to make sure I have some. If it's blank, then, hey, employee name must be entered. If it's too long, hey, it can't be that long. If it has special characters, then I put out that message. And the set custom validity is saying, this is the error message I want you to use. It's very similar to that data valid message that I said earlier. So I don't expect you to absorb all of that right there, but just know that that's the kind of stuff you need to be doing to write validations into your grids. Now, this validation for the server side is a lot easier. I just put the regular expression in, and there's many, many ways to put server-side validations in. Just be smart and do them. So that's just on employee. What about, and this is a real important thing. So for salary, maybe I want salary. I'm going to give this guy a big raise, right? Oh, well, I can't. Salary must be, and this is my client side, right? Because I haven't hit submit yet. Must be between 100 and 3,000. Okay, well, let's make that 3,000. Cool, right? I'm good. So let's save. Wait, I gotta clear this one. Okay, so let's get rid of this, and I don't want. I changed my mind on that one. So let's do the save. Wait a minute. Now I've got, it says 2,000. Well, why is that? Because my client-side validation was not the same as my server side. My server side was more restrictive, so it's not going to let me do it. So my message here is plan your validations, make sure your client side match your server side, and be consistent on them. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you here. Why didn't we get a server-side message for this guy? Because it's 5,000, right? That should have fired. Well, what happens on all of these processes, and while that refreshes, I'm going to go back over here. My save interactive grid process says execution scope for created or modified rows or for all submitted rows. Now, it said all submitted rows. What the heck, Karen? It didn't fire for all rows. Well, it did fire for all submitted rows. And I turned debug on purpose. So on this guy, I'm going to say, and you notice I double-clicked to get into edit. I did not use the edit button, so maybe at some point I will turn that edit button off. But I remind me to come back to that, because you can't just declaratively unedit it, because then you're not able to edit. So it's very interesting how that works. You can toggle this on and off. So anyhow, I changed that one row, right? So now I'm going to submit. And we know it's going to fire on the server side, right? Well, let's look what actually happened here and see what it submitted. And I'm going to point out that it only submitted row one row status update. It did not submit any row that I haven't touched. So if I, see, condition has to be, and 0 is not a valid one. If I touch another row, and even if I now untouch it and submit, I still have those errors, sorry. I should be able to get rid of this and submit again. Then it's going to give me that that same thing. It'll probably give me submit 2 rows. So just know that the only rows that get submitted are those that are actually touched. If you really, really need to submit all the rows, then you need to write, you actually have to touch all the rows. So you can simulate that by writing a little piece of JavaScript that just loops through all rows and touches each row. I had an example, I had a client where we needed to touch all rows in this particular process in a survey, and we actually tacked on another dummy column and touched that column every time we had to do a submit for validation. And it worked, and nobody knew the difference behind the scenes. So any questions on that, just email me and I'll send you more on the validations. This is a client side. I wish I didn't have that guy right there. But this one is saying I have hover, tell me the problem. Should tell me the problem. I don't know what it's complaining about at the moment, but there it is. My commission must be at least 10% of the salary and not greater. Well, now I'm actually looking at 2 columns. So how do we do that? And if I look at commission down here, on the server side, it's very simple because I'm using that column name references. On the my dynamic action, that's my client side validation, gets a little more complicated because I'm using Apex item to access 2 different columns, and then the logic is the same, and the same set custom validity stuff. So again, I'm not intending to do a deep dive on validations, but when you're editing a grid, when you're building an editable grid, this is something you really need to be aware of. And oh my gosh, so one more thing left to go through here. Sometimes you don't want all the buttons, and there are myriad ways of doing of changing. Yeah, that's okay. That default, are you sure you want to leave? Maybe I don't want all these buttons there. I can build a configuration of my own, and the way you do that, and I have a whole presentation on customizing these toolbars, is through adding, you guessed it, JavaScript in the JavaScript initialization area, which is where we do all our customizations. And no, this is not the help text. It's just an easy way to do this for demonstration purposes. And now what I've done is I've reconfigured my toolbar so that I brought the delete button up here. So if I have selected rows and I want to delete them, same action, and then I could just refresh. And yes, there's unsave. So all of this is possible. It just takes a little bit of learning. If you do customize like this, then please, please, please standardize and do this. Don't be copying the code in, and these are all the things I've just shown you. Don't be copying the code in every time, but put it in a standard file. And this is all the code I just showed you, highlighting that custom validity. Why did my grid validations not fire? That's the all submitted rows. Lots of options for customizing, and I showed you this is that code, but if you need it, just ask for the sample application because it's got tons of examples in there. Standardize across what you name things, what your grid layout is, what buttons you use, what processes you use, what validations you use. And if you do configurations, put them in a common configuration file, include the JavaScript file, and simply apply classes to your grid. It makes things simple and consistent. I don't have time to run through this in details, but this is how you would standardize. And it's I would include the file, I would add the reference to the function that's in that file in the JavaScript initialization code instead of the whole long list of code. And then I just add a class to the appearance part of my grid region. And that means anyone can include the file and add a class. Not everyone needs to know all the JavaScript or the nitty-gritty details. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. I know I'm a few minutes over. There's so much to learn about grids, and hopefully I helped you with a few things on editing grids. Download the Sample Interactive Grid app. Go to Hard Like Software, read everything there. Download the Interactive Grid Cookbook, install it, and there are examples there that you're like, whoever thought of this? That's what I said. And then I thought, wait a minute, I can use that. If you really want some reading material, read the JavaScript widget code and the JavaScript APIs for grids. That'll put you to sleep. Stay sane, keep your users happy. Know what your grid does, and there's a ton to learn here. And everybody stay happy. Let's get back to live conferences and meeting each other and having fun. In order to do that, stay safe in the meantime. So thank you so much for listening, and let me jump back here and look for questions. And again, so now I have to jump back to where you are. Thank you.
Yes, we have a few questions.
Okay.
And if anyone in the session also have any extra questions, please feel free to ask in the chat, and Karen will be responding. And
okay.
Basically, I have a question for Faiz. I have on one-click deployment in our environment, we would like to have some control where not all in one environment gets promoted to another environment, whereas as one click seems to give a lot of power to the developer teams. Can we be selective and do deployments of only those views or objects that need to be deployed using one-click deployments?
Very good question, and it's not specific to interactive grids. It's Apex in general, but that's great because I get it. In our application, this one page, we change this one grid. That's all we want to deploy, and the answer is within the Apex, the Oracle Apex tool itself, and the utilities that come with it. That is not possible right now. I believe you can deploy by page. However, InSum has a deployment tool, and I do not know what the cost is, and their tool has the ability to deploy by element, essentially. So if I just change one grid, then it would let me just deploy that grid, and they needed to do that to productize their stuff and make updates easier. So I hate to point you somewhere else, but the team at InSum has developed that more specific way of upgrading, and that lets you more selectively deploy exactly what has changed. And I hope that helps.
Fantastic. Let's get this next question. And our organization is promoting PowerShell more. So is there any resource or help available for Oracle Apex with PowerShell?
None that I am aware of. I don't have a better answer for you. I wish I did, sorry.
Yeah, basically he's saying, I am trying to automate some tasks for an existing website written using Oracle Apex via PowerShell. Mm-hmm. And there is a drop down for states. And when a state is selected, the data needs to change accordingly. I am able to select the desired state and fire the on-charge event successfully, but this does not change the data like a manual selection of the drop-down option would. Could someone please assist how I can use a PowerShell get same result as a manual selection? We're using OEM for now and just doing our deployments with scripts.
Okay. I wish I knew, but I do not know. I'm not super familiar with how PowerShell is. I mean, it seems like it seems I'm where you are. If the on-change event fires successfully, then it should follow through on the other end. But obviously, there's some nuance of PowerShell that isn't following through. So I wish I could help, but what I can do is reach out to some people that that may know. I know a few people that have done a lot more with automations and automated testing, and that seems like the kind of place that would come up. So good luck to you in the meantime, and I will look that up, and just drop me an email, and I'll try and find an answer for you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. Excellent session as always. And if anyone has any questions watching the recordings or later after the session, please let us know and we can forward your questions to Karen. And also she pointed out the information on her presentation too.
Great. Yeah, for this one or for validations or for customizations, it's all free for you guys. I like to share. That's how I learned. Good luck to you all. My email I just dropped in ahead of you.
Fantastic. Just saw in the chat.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you,
enjoy the rest of the Apex days.
Thank you. And please, everyone, be safe. And Karen, have a wonderful evening. And we have more sessions from Karen in the next days. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.